Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I am Nitij, and in today's tutorial we will be unlocking the secrets of Google reCAPTCHA. If you have ever wondered how to protect your website from bots while also keeping it user friendly, then Google reCAPTCHA is your friend. So reCAPTCHA is Google's security service that protects your website from spam and abuse. It uses advanced risk analysis techniques to tell humans and bots apart. So why is reCAPTCHA that important? Well, if you want to be able to successfully distinguish between real users and bots, that's where reCAPTCHA steps in to save the day. Now, the important thing is, how can you keep your site secured without annoying your users with excessive and annoying bot checks for your real users? That's the beauty of reCAPTCHA. It offers security without sacrificing user experience. Let's dive into how reCAPTCHA versions 2 and 3 make that possible. So reCAPTCHA v2 or version 2 is the familiar "I'm not a robot" checkbox. Sometimes it asks you to identify images. It's user-friendly but can be a bit intrusive. In this video, you will see how you can add this to your website. reCAPTCHA v3, however, is a newer, more adaptive solution. It runs in the background and assigns a score to each user's interaction, determining if it's likely to be a human or a bot. This means no more puzzles for your real users. I will now walk you through a step-by-step guide to implement both reCAPTCHA v2 and v3 in a front-end application, which also has a backend that we will use to verify the reCAPTCHA tokens. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to set up the reCAPTCHA keys for both v2 and v3. To do that, you will just have to open up the homepage of Google reCAPTCHA and then click on this v3 admin console on this top navigation bar. When you will click on it, then a page will open up which will prompt you to register a new site. So you have to enter a label value. I am just going to enter my reCAPTCHA, and the type that I'm going to select is the v2 because we are going to implement the "I'm not a robot" checkbox first into our React frontend. And for domain, I'm just going to add localhost for now because we will be testing our code locally and we will not be deploying it on a server yet. So let's click on submit so that the v2 type of reCAPTCHA site will be created. Now, when a reCAPTCHA site is created, then we are given two keys. The first one is a site key. The second one is a secret key. Let me just zoom this in. So the site key is meant to be present in our front-end code that we will send to Google along with all the requests. The secret key is going to be saved or stored on this server side, which we will use to verify the tokens that the users will generate with their interaction with our front end. Now, when we have the site keys with us, let's take a look at the existing project template that we are going to modify to integrate Google reCAPTCHA into the existing code. So in this project, there is React in the front end and Firebase serverless functions in the backend. The front end, you know why we need it. It is the presentation layer for the users to interact with our application, and the backend is to do any kind of stuff that needs to be done on the backend side. So I'm just going to run this application on a local server so that you will see what is already there. So let's type npm start. So while the application is starting on a local server, let's also emulate the Firebase function locally so that we will not have to deploy our changes every single time we are making a change in the function code. So for that, there is a command which I have created, which is Firebase emulate. So I will create another video to show you how to set up a basic template with React in the front end and Firebase in the backend. And that same template is the one which I'm using for this tutorial video. But for now, just understand that we will be using the backend to verify the tokens or to confirm the tokens with Google to know that the token which has been generated on the front end is indeed a correct one. Alright, so both front end and the backend functions are now available for testing on our local host. So this is a login page or a login component. Right now, there is no functionality associated with this component, and when we will click on the login button, then a request will be made to the Firebase function. It will simply return that the request is successful, and we will see a message, login successful. Now, where does reCAPTCHA comes into this picture? What we need to do is, when someone is logging into our website, then we need to make sure that they are a real person and not a bot. So let's get started integrating reCAPTCHA v2, having a I am not a robot checkbox widget with our login component. So the first thing that we need to do to render the widget is to create the widget itself. Now it's not like the widget is going to be created manually by ourselves. Google has already done that. What we need to do is we need to create a component in React, which when used will render the widget. So now let's first create the reCAPTCHA widget. The first thing that I will do is I will create a new folder in the components folder with the name reCAPTCHA. Now let's create a new file in it with the name index.jsx. Now in this index.jsx, first I will create a simple component and let's just name it as reCAPTCHA. Now this component is going to accept a bunch of props, but I will come to that later. The first thing that we need to do is to load the reCAPTCHA script into the browser from this component, and to do that we are going to use useEffect hook. So within useEffect we are going to run a function when the component loads for the first time. Now the first thing that we need to do, we need to check if the window.gReCAPTCHA object is available or not. If it is not available, then we are going to create a new script element and then add it to the documents head. As soon as that is done, the browser will start to download the reCAPTCHA script. So for that, let's first create a script element. So const script equals to document.create element. This is just basic HTML and JavaScript code. So the tag name is a script. Next, we need to set the script.src value. So the src value is the URL of the JavaScript file that the browser needs to download and then execute for Google reCAPTCHA. You can find that URL in the documentation, or I can save you some trouble and paste it directly over here, which is this one. Now we need to provide some parameters for this URL or for this src. The first one is going to be an onload callback. So this callback is essential because we need to know when the script is done executing and the gReCAPTCHA object is available with the window to be safely used to render the widget. So for onload, we have to provide the name of a function which is available globally in the window object. I mean, that's the important thing, not in the React context, but in the browser's context. So I'm just going to call this function as on reCAPTCHA load. There is also one more parameter that we have to use, which is render with the value explicit. Now let's set script.async equals to true so that it's non-blocking, and finally let's add script.defer equals to true again so that the browser will load truly important script first before it loads this one. But if there is nothing else to load, then it will simply prioritize loading the reCAPTCHA script. Now finally we have to add document dot head dot append child, and we have to provide the reference of the script. Now if the reCAPTCHA object is not available with the window, then we are doing this thing. We are creating a new script element and then appending it to the head. But if it's available, then what we have to do is else if window.g reCAPTCHA is available. And let's also check one more thing with this, and that is the availability of render method or render function, just to be sure. If it's available, then we will simply set the state of our reCAPTCHA component, which will reflect that yes, reCAPTCHA object is available. So to do that, I'm just going to create a new state variable. So const is reCAPTCHA loaded, and then let me just fix this spelling first. reCAPTCHA, yep, I think that's the correct one. So set is reCAPTCHA loaded equals to use state. Let's set the initial value to false. When the component code has confirmed that it is loaded or it is already loaded, then it will set it to true. So again, let's come back to the else part. So if reCAPTCHA is already available, then we will set this state variable to true. Now remember, I mentioned about the onload callback, which should be available on the Windows context or the global scope. Now what we can do is we can bind a React function with the globally available on reCAPTCHA load function, so that when the script will be done executing, then instead of the globally available function in the window, our React function is going to be called. So for that, I'm first going to create a new function. Let's just name it as const on reCAPTCHA load, and what I will do is I will simply write window.onReCAPTCHA load equals to this onReCAPTCHA load. Now when this onReCAPTCHA load will be called, then again we have to set this state variable to true, which will simply indicate that the reCAPTCHA widget has been loaded. But because we are assigning something to the window, there can be a possibility of memory leaks. So when we will be returning from this effect function, then we simply have to return a function which is going to unbind the Windows onReCAPTCHA load function and set it to null. So there goes your cleanup with the reCAPTCHA component. Now when we will know that the is reCAPTCHA loaded state variable is set, then we can use another effect hook. So use effect, this is going to run when this state variable will change, and if it is true or set, then we can call window.g reCAPTCHA.render. But how do we render it? Where do we store the rendered component? And for that, what we can do is we can create a new ref. So for that, let's create a new const reCAPTCHA ref equals to use ref with the initial value of null. Now what we can do is we can simply provide this ref as an argument. So reCAPTCHA ref dot current, and we will also have to provide some options. The options are going to be the site key. So remember the site key and secret key which Google gave us for reCAPTCHA v2, that site key we have to use over here. So site key, and we also need to provide the value of a callback. So the callback is going to be the function. So when the user will interact with this widget, then a token will be generated by Google indicating the state of the interaction. So that token will be received as an argument in this callback function. And this site key and the callback, we are going to provide them as props so that this reCAPTCHA component can be truly usable across our entire website. Now after this is done, the only thing which is left is to return the reCAPTCHA ref.current from this component, and that's pretty much everything that we have to do for the reCAPTCHA component. Now let's get back to our login component and integrate the reCAPTCHA with our login component. So the first thing that I will do is I will import the reCAPTCHA component, and then it's time to make some modifications. The first thing is we will need to place the widget somewhere. I'm just going to place it above the button. which should be a close enough place for the user to interact with the widget. So div class name, let's set the margin top as 4 like other divs, and then reCAPTCHA. The first thing that we need to do is we need to provide a site key, right? The site key is going to be our site key. Let me just copy it from the reCAPTCHA dashboard. So click on this copy site key and paste it over here. Now for callback, I'm going to create another function to receive the token. Let's call the callback function as const handle token equals to token. And now how do we, or where do we store the token? Actually the question should be, where do we store the token? How do we manage it? And for that I am just going to create a new state variable for the token, which can be called as const token set token equals to use state. Let's set the initial value as an empty string. Now while we are at it, let's also create a new state variable for the enabled or disabled state of the button, because we only want to enable the submit button after the user has interacted with the widget and we have received the token to be submitted along with the email and password to the server or to our serverless function. Let's call it as submit enabled or set submit enabled equals to use state. Let's set it initially to, I think, false. Okay, so now we have token and set token. So over here I'm just going to call set token and provide the value of token over here. Now when we have the token, then what we want to do is we want to set submit enable to true, because we have the tokens value. So use effect, let's provide the effect function. This will be called when the token will be changed. So if token has a length, then we are going to set submit enabled to true, and we can use this set submit enabled value over here. So submit enabled. Now as you can see, we have a bunch of different attributes on this button, like disabled, on click, type, class name, but we also have to update the visual state of the button while the button is enabled or disabled. Now for that we can just make some change to the class name. So these are all the Tailwind classes, if you're wondering what are all these values. So if it is enabled, then we have to provide a set of classes, otherwise we have to provide another set of classes. So if it is enabled, then I'm just going to provide the background and hover classes, rest are common. If it is not enabled, then I can just provide a different background. Let's provide gray background. Let's also set the cursor appropriately, so cursor not allowed. Alright, I'm just going to save it now. And what else? Yep, we need to provide the callback. So callback, not this one, callback equals to, now callback is the handle token function, so handle token. And I guess that's everything we need to do. Now let's check if the widget is being rendered or not. Now it says reCAPTCHA placeholder element must be an element or ID. So let me check what went wrong with our code. Okay, so there are a bunch of mistakes that I have done over here while quickly walking you through along with the code. So first of all, we cannot directly return the ref as a return value or as a renderable HTML. So we have to set the ref property of this div, and over here we have to provide this reCAPTCHA ref as a value. So what we intend to do is we intend the Google to use this div to render the widget, and for that we have to provide the reference of this div. So I have associated this ref with this div so that its current is going to point towards this HTML div itself when it will be rendered. Now let's see if our code is working or not. Yep, now it's working. You can see the widget is here and we also have the login button. Let's click on the I am not a robot checkbox. Now when it's checked, it simply means that we have got the token, and when the token is available, then this login button is now enabled. Now it's time to send the token to this server, and to do that there is a handle submit function which is already calling the Firebase serverless function. So I'm just going to provide the token as an additional argument over here, and that's pretty much everything we need to do from front end. Now we need to provide the implementation on the backend side, and that is for the login.js function. So over here right now nothing is happening, only a valid true is being returned. What we have to do is we have to return valid true or false based upon the checking of the validity of the token, which we will do. So the first thing that I will do is I will destructure the all the different values that we are getting with the data. So const email, password and token, although we don't need email and password for this tutorial, but still let's just destructure everything. Next we will create a variable and let's just call it as success. Let's set the initial value as false. Now it's time to store the secret key. Now the standard way to store keys is in either environment variables or in a dedicated key manager, but for the sake of this tutorial video I'm just going to save it in the code itself. Now when we have the key, then we can simply call const reCAPTCHA response. But before we can call the Google's API to verify the token, first let's download Axios as well, that we will use to make a post request. So to do that I'm just going to create a new terminal and then cd functions npm install Axios. Now while Axios is installing, I am just going to fetch it. So const Axios equals to require Axios. Now let's get back to our previous code. So const reCAPTCHA response equals to await Axios. Why is my keyboard not working? Not sure. Okay, Axios dot post, because it's going to be a post request, and then we have to provide the URL that we can use to verify, and the URL for that is this one. Again, I'm saving you the trouble of going to the documentation and then finding out what the URL is, but in any case this is the URL, but we also have to provide the secret with the URL, which is our the secret key for v2, and we also have to provide the token, which needs to be provided with the response parameter. So let's do that as well. So response equals to token, which we destructured. Okay, now we have provided the key and token. Now it's time to check the validity of the token. So for that I'm just going to check if reCAPTCHA response dot data dot success is true or not. If it's true, then I'm just going to set this success equals to true, and for valid we are just going to return success as a value. Now let's just save it so that the emulation will pick up the recent changes that we have done. Actually, let's check if it's correctly loaded or not. Yep, it's loaded correctly. Okay, so now let's try and test our code if it's working. So let me refresh this page again to refresh the widget as well. Now let's click on I am not a robot. Let's click on login, and it says login unsuccessful. So I guess the reason that the login is unsuccessful is because we have still not provided the secret key. So let's copy the secret key from the dashboard and paste it in our code. So I'm just going to paste it over here. Let's save it again. Now refresh the page, click on the checkbox, click on login. Now it says login successful, which simply means that our token is now verified by Google, and our backend has confirmed that the token that was generated was indeed generated by a legitimate person and not by a bot. Now let's come to implementing reCAPTCHA v3. So reCAPTCHA v2 provides us a widget. It's an extra step which the user has to interact with, but with reCAPTCHA v3 we can silently check if the user is legit or not in the background while we are making any request to the server. So let's just do that. The first thing that we need to do is to create a new site for reCAPTCHA v3, and what I'm gonna do is, let's get back to the you know what, let's just start again. Okay, let's click on plus over here. I think that's how we can create another one. Yep. So label is going to be my reCAPTCHA. I think it should be unique, so I'm just going to use v3. Now the type is going to be score based v3. Score simply means that when the token will be generated after the call Google service to generate the token for the user interaction, then we will get a score, and based on that score we can evaluate if the interaction is by a legitimate user or not. For domain, again I'm going to provide localhost. Now let's click on submit. So we have our site key and secret key, again the same thing, but this time we will not create a component to render a widget, but we will need to silently check in the background and generate a token, and for that I'm going to create a React hook. So again, getting back to our code, and I will create a new folder in the components, and let's call it as hooks. Now let's create another folder. Let's just call it as reCAPTCHA v3. Let's create a new index.jsx file in here. Okay, so let's generate a template, which is this one. Now I'm just going to call it as use reCAPTCHA v3. Okay, now some of the things are similar to how we were building the reCAPTCHA v2 component. We have to load the script if it's not available, and we have to do some things which are different as well. So what we will do first is we will simply check if the reCAPTCHA is ready or not. So for that we are just going to create a state variable with the name is reCAPTCHA ready. Let's provide the function name as well. Set is reCAPTCHA ready equals to use state. Let's set the initial value to false, and then same stuff, use effect for effect function, and then it will run when the component or the hook is run for the first time. So first we will simply check if window.g reCAPTCHA is available or not. If it's available, then we will simply set is reCAPTCHA ready to true. I think the spelling is not correct, but I mean it doesn't really matter. So, and in the else part, same stuff that we were doing in the reCAPTCHA component. So I'm just going to copy this entire code from over here and then paste it over here. We will create a new script element, but this time the parameters are going to be different. We don't need the onload parameter for the callback, and we also don't need this render explicit. The only thing that we will need is a render parameter, and its value is going to be the site key. Okay, so let me just convert it into a template string. The site key is going to be the prop so that this hook can be reusable, and let's set async equals to true. We don't need defer equals to true anyways, and then append the script to the head. But we will also need one more thing, is when the script is loaded, then we will assign a callback to a script load event. So let's just do that. When the script is loaded, then we will simply set this set is reCAPTCHA ready to true to let us know that this script is loaded now. And let's do one more thing. The site key can change. So what I can do is I can simply use site key as the dependency for executing this effect function. Now the next thing that we will need is another function to execute reCAPTCHA silently in the background. For that I am just going to create a new function which is called as execute reCAPTCHA equals to, let's use callback because this hook can be reused, so we can cache this function's implementation. So use callback. It's going to be an async function, so async, this is going to accept an argument for the action. So we can associate the silent fetching of token by using reCAPTCHA v3 with an action. So in our case, our action is the login action. I will show you how this can be done. So action, now in this function, if we have to check if is reCAPTCHA ready, if reCAPTCHA is ready or not. If it's ready, let's also check for window.g reCAPTCHA as well, because there might be a race condition. So let's just do that just to be safe. So we will simply call return await, let's just paste it, window.reCAPTCHA.execute. Now we have to provide the site key and we have to provide the action as as an option. It's optional, you don't have to provide the action, but if you want to be sure with which action the token was associated with, then you can do that. Okay, so now we will finally return the execute reCAPTCHA, and that is pretty much everything that we have to do. Let's return reCAPTCHA v3 from over here. Let's just save the hook, and now it's time to integrate this hook with our login component. So let's open up the login component, and what I'm going to do is I am just going to first comment out everything related to v2. So comment out this one as well. Let's also import use reCAPTCHA v3, and we don't need this token state variable. Let's also set the, we can enable the button all the time because we are going to do the silent background checking of the user's legitimacy. Now let's fetch a reference to the execute reCAPTCHA function by simply calling const execute reCAPTCHA equals to use reCAPTCHA v3. Now we have to provide the site key as an argument. Now similar to v2, we can get the site key from the dashboard. So click on copy site key and then paste it over here. And next thing that we need to do is in our handle submit function, before we call the backend function, we simply need to call execute reCAPTCHA to get a reCAPTCHA token. And for that I'm just going to write const reCAPTCHA token equals to await execute reCAPTCHA, and we can provide an action value. I'm just going to provide login. So when that is done, we can simply set the value of token as reCAPTCHA token, and that's pretty much everything I guess we need to do on the front end side. Let me check again if there is anything else. Nope, I think this will do. But we also have to make some changes on the backend function side as well. So let's just do that. So on the backend side, I'm just going to make some changes. The first one is going to be the value of the success variable. Let's just set it to true. If the confirmation with Google fails, then we can set it to false, and we will need to change this v2 to v3, and we need to use the v3's secret key, which is this one. So let me just paste it over here. And then for reCAPTCHA response, I think it should be similar. Yeah, reCAPTCHA response should be similar to v2 apart from just using the correct key. And what else? Yep, over here we have to check if it's not successful, but along with that we can also check if the reCAPTCHA response dot data dot score is less than I think 0.5 can be used as a safe score to verify if it's a user interaction or not, or if a bot is trying to log in into our website. We can check one more thing, and that is the action that we used. So if the action is not login, if it's a different action, if a malicious user is trying to generate the token from some other place, then also we can set to success as false. Again, same thing, returning the value of success. Let's just save it. Let's see if there are no errors over here. Oh yeah, there are actually errors. I think there is the need for some kind of cleanup in our login component. So let's just do that. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, I must have missed something. Yep. First of all, we don't need this handle token function, and then we also don't need this use effect call over here. And so yep, let's now test our code. So now I will click on the login button to see if our code is working. It says login successful. So we have covered a lot today, from the basics of reCAPTCHA to implementing both v2 and v3 on your website. Remember, the right choice depends on your specific needs and user experience goals. If you want to use v2 or v3, it depends on what your exact requirements are. In the end, if you found this tutorial helpful, then please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Share your thoughts or any questions in the comments below. Stay tuned for more content like this, and I will see you in the next one.